Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here to do our SEC football power rankings after week one. We thank our sponsor, MyPerfectFranchise.net. Let's start at the bottom where we always start. Number 14, the Vanderbilt Commodores. Vanderbilt is 2-0, but has not looked great in that. Not been ideal along the lines of scrimmage, especially the offensive line. But the Commodores are 2-0, and they play Wake Forest in a game that I think will be a litmus test this week. Blake, Florida, our number 13 team. The Gators had a litmus test last week against Utah and failed it, according to in the eyes of most. Rough season ahead, perhaps, for Billy Napier and the Gators.
Yeah, just for reference here, if you're new to the channel, these are composite power rankings. These are not Chris and I's rankings. This is for our entire staff at Southeastern 14. So we combine everybody's individual rankings together, and it all goes into our composite ranking. So just that way, if you want to send your frustration to not one person in particular, it's we all have a hand in these rankings. And so, yeah, I mean, with Florida, like we said, not a great start. And like we mentioned going the season, Chris, we were not as high on Florida, you and I individually, as some people were out there, and just wasn't, exactly what you wanted to see from the Gators in game one. So we'll see if they can bounce back. Probably won't learn a ton about them though until that game, week and a half, 2 weeks from now against Tennessee. So,
speaking of not ideal performances, South Carolina gave up 9 sacks and could not run the ball against North Carolina at a 14-point loss. The Gamecocks check in at number 12. We talked about that and an instant reaction on Saturday night. I say I wasn't part of that, but I don't know that I would have added that you guys didn't add.
Well, we didn't say 11. A ton, just quickly, Chris. We really, because we were doing it as that game was going on. Now, yes, like at the end, I think it was, we pretty much had an idea that North Carolina was going to win that game. But just to quickly add, I mean, like you said, just no running game whatsoever. And, it's just, it was a disappointing performance, I think, if you're a South Carolina fan. Rattler goes 30 of 39 for 353. But, yeah, I know, again, it's just one that we're talking about some of these games that SEC teams felt like what a great opportunity in week one and just was not able to capitalize it on in the big 3 games. So,
number 11, Mississippi State. And I could make an argument that State goes higher, and I think I did rank State higher in my power rankings than our composite did. I really like the way this team looked in its opening game under Zach Arnett. Mississippi State has been able to run the ball with this new offense, or modified offense, is I guess way to put it. And its defense was intact from last year when it was pretty good. The number 10 team in our power rankings this week, the Missouri Tigers, who were kind of what we expected, I think. Not the biggest offensive juggernaut in the league, but certainly a team that looked pretty stout defensively in its opening night win over South Dakota.
Yeah, keep in mind, these are week 2 power rankings, right? Like, for every team except Vanderbilt, we got one game to go off of. And so it's just, it's like, how much can you take away from a 35-10 game against South Dakota? And yeah, now we just wait and see, I think, to see how the offense continues to evolve. But we knew coming in the defense was going to be pretty fantastic. And so, like I said, an interesting game this week against MTSU, who Alabama just took it to on Saturday. But we'll see, if you want to compare scores, we'll see what Missouri can do with the Blue Raiders.
Number 9, Auburn, another team that I thought looked maybe a little better than expected in week one. We know Hugh Freeze is a good coach. We're pretty sure he's going to get that program turned around. But I thought a very impressive performance for Auburn in its opener. And guess what? It has found a way to use 2 quarterbacks. Robbie Ashford is Hugh Freeze promised. Good grief. Had a pretty significant role in the opener, so much that he's left me tongue-tied here.
No, I thought Auburn, we did talk about that on Saturday night in the live stream. I thought there was, it's UMass, and I get it. And we were kind of talking about going to the game, you're trying to find a path for UMass. They had just broken the 20-something game road losing streak and all that. But I thought the way Auburn used Robbie Ashford and just the way they played, and I was very impressed by them. And like I said, as impressed as you could be just from a game one against, again, a team that they should beat. But yeah, I told you guys, I thought Auburn was a team I was most interested in just to seeing what they look like, in 4 quarters, because we just hadn't seen it yet, outside of, just what you hear in the summer and spring and all that. But yeah, I thought there was a lot of good coming out of it for Auburn. So to me, they're in a really good position to keep moving up with an interesting game at Cal this week.
Ole Miss just threw the ball all over the yard in a demolition of Mercer. I don't know what more to say. Ole Miss, I guess, is the leading team in the league in passing yards and scoring margin after week one, but certainly you don't take a lot away from, I guess, a game like that, but you certainly didn't leave that one, I don't think, feeling any worse about Ole Miss than you entered, and now the Rebels have a big showdown with Tulane this weekend.
Look, if we're in the power rankings, right? If you're just doing power rankings based off of what you see in 1 week, like which we have to tie in, I think the overall kind of deal. And again, everybody does power rankings different, but sure, I mean you put Ole Miss up near the top, at the top maybe. I mean because they scored 73 points and won by 66 or whatever. And yeah, we mentioned that. I mean, Jackson Dart made some nice. I mean, Trey Harris said it. Chris scores a touchdown at 14:05 in the first quarter, 12:26 in the first quarter, 11:45 in the first quarter. Span of what 2.5 minutes or whatever. He scores 3 touchdowns and scores 4 for the game. So yeah, that was a big bright spot as Blaine brought up in the reaction, and so that gives you a lot of optimism. Teams that they go out and just take care of their business the way they should take care of their business. Sometimes I can tell you a lot more about a team than anything because sometimes you let teams hang around. You're like, yeah, well, it wasn't exactly what we wanted to see, but I loved seeing that Ole Miss just took it to them, and that's what they should have done.
The Kentucky Wildcats at number 7 didn't always look great in a win over Ball State. Ray Davis did go over 100 yards. Kentucky lost Kenneth Horsey. He came off on a cart. I think that's something to watch for a team that had offensive line troubles a year ago. I think Kentucky's offense is going to be better than what we saw, but I do have a couple of questions after that one. And the defense, as usual, was pretty good.
I mean, I think Ball State was probably a little more prepared for SEC competition than some of these other teams. Certainly, we saw against SEC teams in week one. So, you can put a little bit on that too. But I think, yeah, I mean, again, it's game one. We like overreacting, just like Oreos overreacting to
Good grief.
Kentucky's performance, I guess. But yeah, I thought Kentucky was fine. That it's just one of those things where again, we talked about this too in the reaction stream on Saturday. It's as Devin Leary gets more game time with his receivers and everybody just there's a lot of new pieces we talked about, sort of bringing in Devin Leary, Ray Davis, and such. It's game one. They won by 30 against a MAC team that I think has some nice pieces, but yeah, we'll learn more about Kentucky here in the coming weeks.
He's still going.
No, he's ready.
He is.
What are we, top 6, 7 in the power rankings now?
Yes, and leading off the top 6, Arkansas, a team that didn't run the ball very well, but did throw it fairly well in a win over Western Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're just repeating ourselves here. It's like, well, yeah, they won 56-13.
There's not a whole lot we can take from most of these games. There's about 3 or 4 of them that you could make sweeping conclusions from, and then good luck to you.
Yeah, I'm trying. I don't have a whole lot here. I mean, again, I didn't get a chance to watch a ton of this game. I've gone back and watched bits and pieces of it just to kind of, see exactly because, like you said, there's just so many games going on early in the season when you have this many teams playing at once. And so, yeah, I mean, up 35 to 3.5. And I mean, I think Arkansas is going to be who we think Arkansas is going to be. Like, I think it's just, we just probably can't fully form an opinion on them just yet after one game.
Number 5, in my mind, the most disappointing team in week one. I don't know how else to put it. I thought that South Carolina would have issues. I thought that Florida would have issues. You did too, that bore out in the opening day losses. LSU, though, I did not see LSU getting pounded the way it did against Florida State. No, look, a lot of credit to Florida State. That is a national title caliber team. That is maybe the most experienced team in the country. But my goodness, I thought that with Brian Kelly having LSU a year or two ahead of schedule a year ago, and with a lot of those guys back and some additions, I just expected a much better performance. I did not see this game being uncompetitive in the fourth quarter the way that it was.
You absolutely argue LSU should be much lower on this list. But again, I think we just, with how we do it with our staff rankings, again, it's just sort of you have to tie in kind of where you had a team to start the season, and because they were higher, I don't think it's just going to completely drop down to the bottom. But think a lot of people would put LSU way further down because, yes, it's very disappointing without question. Some of us, I won't name names here, picked LSU to make the college football playoff. And boy, they got a path to get there now. It's going to take a lot of work to get to that point. They're going to have to win out. So we'll see. But I mean, look, it's very disappointing performance. And, as we say, when you put yourself in this kind of situation, it's how you respond to it. And boy, I'm very curious to see how LSU responds to this game. Now they play Grambling next week, but we talked about it going into the season, Chris. It's like if you were going to be high on LSU, I kept pointing out the same thing. Is that the only thing I'm hesitant about in picking them to do all this stuff that I think they could. That early season schedule, there are some landmines. Those just tricky type games, and then of course late in the season you got to go to Alabama. But we said like a Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Missouri, all these different type road games. They're tricky, and even Arkansas at home. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how much we'll learn about the response next week or this week. But after that, at Mississippi State, home against Arkansas, at Ole Miss, at Missouri, then you keep going, right? Auburn looked great, as we said, and so yeah, that was very disappointing for LSU, and I am very curious to see how they respond from a performance like that they just let slip away there. So
Number 4, the Tennessee Volunteers, and I could argue and did argue that Tennessee should be ranked probably a spot higher here. Blake, I think that people focused on the passing game with Tennessee, and I think you and Blaine talked about this, but Tennessee ran the ball so well, which we had pointed out in the offseason. And look, I don't want to make too many conclusions because it's Virginia, and Virginia is awful offensively under Tony Elliott. I mean, he took a good offense and just sunk it a year ago. But Tennessee was not clicking on offense, still got 49 points against a good defense. It felt like, and don't take this too far because, again, who were they playing? But it kind of felt more like a vintage 1990s Tennessee team where they just ran the ball so well and played defense. And I think if you're a Tennessee fan, you certainly didn't come out of opening week feeling any worse about your team. And maybe you came out of it feeling a little better, depending on what your opinion was of Joe Milton coming in.
yeah, I mean the running back group is just unreal. They are tremendous, and when you have those three guys all having the skill sets that they have, and there's a lot of options you have there, and so that's going to take some of the pressure off too of the passing game, just because all three of those guys are just so dynamic in terms of their running ability. And we talked about the defensive front too Saturday night. We did the live stream. That was something else that really stood out. And yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I had Tennessee at 3 in the individual rankings we did, and again, we can say they didn't look crisp early on and those kind of things, but you do still beat an ACC team by 5 touchdowns, and like we said, I know Virginia struggled a little bit, and other things at play there too. We talked about how tragedy and stuff at the end of last season, and certainly an emotional game I think for them to get back on the field. But yeah, I mean for Tennessee, it just I took a lot of positives away from that game, and you can always pick apart certain things after one game, but I I took a lot of positives away from what they look like and what they can be this season.
Number 3, Texas A&M, and I didn't get to see any of the game, but a lot of people raved about Connor Wegman and that receiving core. Wegman was 18 of 23 for 236, 5 touchdowns. New Mexico, not one of the better teams in the Power 5, but I think, or excuse me, or the FCS. And New Mexico is definitely not Power 5. But I think you saw what you wanted to see if you were an Aggie fan, which was a very productive offense.
Yep, they look great. They did, and so yeah, there's as you said, definitely some people on the staff that had them ranked pretty high here because yeah, they looked really good, and I think that like we said going into the season, I think a lot of us were all kind of like, this is the bounce back, this is the how you respond, and again, I'm not saying to go out and win the SEC after beating New Mexico by 42, but this is at least what you want to see in game one. You want to see a lot. Because think about it, right? Think about how the last season started and sort of just the way things got going. You just felt like you were pulling teeth, right, to get the best out of that team early on. But now they just come out, take care of their business. Like I said earlier, I like seeing that from teams. And now we'll see if they can take care of their business on the road at Miami on Saturday.
Number 2, Alabama. Alabama did what Alabama does in openers, which is just stomp whoever is in its path. And this time it was MTSU. The 39-point spread was a lot to cover. Guess what? Alabama did it. Jalen Milroe was pretty good in that one. And, I think Alabama probably emerges as your favorite in the West, given what we saw out of LSU this weekend.
Yeah, I would say that's fair. Looks like a lot more wide open in terms of that path. Even though, again, there were some people that picked Alabama to win the West. Some of us did not, but I did. I saw a lot of good things from Jalen Milroe going back and watching some of that one as well. And I think it was just kind of your methodical Alabama type performance where they just go out and just decimate you, play after play after play. And yeah, it's just like I said, going the season, MTSU may wind up being a decent team and a good team, perhaps. It's just hard to prepare for Alabama and all the things they bring to the table, even if they had quarterback, situations and all that. You didn't know exactly how it was going to play out, but still Alabama. Still got so much talent across the board, and saw that on display against MTSU.
Number 1, Georgia, our preseason number 1, probably everyone's preseason number 1, or almost everyone's preseason number 1. Certainly everybody in our power rankings had Georgia number 1. And Georgia a little less than impressive at times in what was, I think, a 49-7 win over UT Martin, which Georgia only led 17-0 at the half. But look, this happens in these games. You've seen it across the country in a lot of these mismatches. So Georgia hardly the only team guilty of underachieving for a half or more. In fact, you saw a lot of teams, not that this was going to happen to Georgia, but you saw some 20-point favorites, multiple lose games this weekend. So it wasn't going to happen for Georgia. But point is, we're not going to overact after week 1. Georgia entered the season as a number 1 team. Even if it did not look like the best team in the conference, we take that into context. And the Bulldogs exit week 1 as our number 1 team here.
As Blaine said on Saturday night, we're picking apart Georgia's performance after a 41-point win in week 1. But it makes sense. I mean, there was some good, there was some bad, and but that's for every team. Like, it really is. Like, no one was just completely perfect in week 1. Even, right, I'm sure Lane Kiffin would tell you that Ole Miss wasn't completely perfect despite winning 73-7. And there's always things you can work on. And so, week 1, you get that one over with. You've been waiting to play that game for months and months and months. And some teams get off to a slow start. Some teams, kept it in full gear the whole time. Some teams disappointed, as we said. But Georgia just won again, and they're the 2-time defending champion. And there's no reason to put anyone else here at the top right now. So.
All right, that's our power rankings for week 1. We are doing a daily show now. We won't do it on the holiday this Monday, but other than that, Tuesday through Friday this week, you can catch us 11 to noon Central. We will recap everything going on in the SEC. We will have our usual slew of predictions and other things up as the week goes by. For Blake Lovell, I'm Chris Lee with Southeastern 14. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.